Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for the Bladensburg Bus Garage Reconstruction Project Fall Community Engagement Meeting. Just to honor everyone's time, we're going to get started. Next slide. So as always, we're doing this as a hybrid meeting. So as we get to the Q&A, if you're in person, if you just raise your hand, we'll bring a mic to you so you can ask any questions at the end of each section. If you are online, you feel free to type your questions in the chat. If you would like to speak your question, simply raise your hand using the raise hand function. Next slide. Which is located at the bottom right of the Zoom screen under reactions. You will see raise hand. Next slide. So just so we can get through today's meeting, we ask you to keep a civil tone. We may ask you to try to limit your questions so that everyone has an opportunity. We will always come back to you for additional questions. Today's agenda is we're going to do introductions of the team, a project overview and updates, construction updates, and then the look ahead. And with that, I'll turn it over to Maya.
Denzel, and good evening, everyone here in the room and online. It's my pleasure to bring you the latest updates from our exciting project. Just quick introduction, my name is Maya Nino. I'm the Senior Program Manager with the Capital Delivery Office with WMATA. To my left is Ms. Jamila Hamadingrid. She is the PMCM Deputy Project Manager. And to my right, Mr. Dan Goucher. He is the Contractor Project Manager. And last but not least, Mr. Sean Pratt. He is a PMCM Project Manager. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Jamila Hamadingrid for project overview and updates.
Thanks, Maya. So I'll go next slide, please. First of all, good evening. Thank you for joining. At the last meeting, we provided an update on Metro's small business programs, construction progress, and zero emission bus. We also answered questions from the community. You can find a project recording as well as the questions and answers online. So you can visit the website that you see on the screen. Next slide, please. We always like to start with the project recap, especially for those who may be joining for the very first time. The site will include a new maintenance facility, parking for 300 buses, charging infrastructure, and equipment to support battery electric bus, as well as a parking structure for 450 employees. So the map that you see on the screen shows 3 areas. The part in blue is for the new maintenance facility, and we're currently in that first phase, and that consists of replacing the new maintenance facility, and that takes place from July 2021 to August 2024. The area that you see is in green is where we will build the parking structure and also some bus parking, and that takes place from August 2024 to March 2026. And in the third phase that you see in orange, we will complete the remainder of the bus parking, and that takes place from March 2026 to December 2026. Next slide, please. So here are our best practices for cleanliness and noise control on the site. We clean areas daily. We also station waste receptacles throughout the site. We tie down items to prevent debris from flying around. And also we have DOEE approved stormwater runoff controls. We also wash construction vehicle wheels, particularly the muddy ones, to prevent the mud from being tracked into the street. And we have an on-site street sweeper to assist with this. We also pick up trash weekly near the construction entrances. And our typical weekday crew hours are limited from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And we also limit oversized load deliveries from 9:30 a.m. to 3 p.m. Next slide, please. Okay, so this shows our construction traffic flow and our contractors parking. The site is bound by 25th Place Northeast, Bladensburg Road Northeast, the properties on 28th Street Northeast, as well as the railroad tracks. The main entrance is located at Gate 1, which is along 25th Place Northeast. The secondary entrance is along Bladensburg Road Northeast. We also have 2 areas designated for contractors' personal vehicles in order to help prevent congestion in the neighborhood. And that includes 2122, 24th Place Northeast, as well as the properties on 28th Street Northeast. Next slide, please. Also, here is a slide of our permitting status. You can see where we are with each agency, and I'll highlight the most recent updates, which includes submitting phase 2 and phase 3 plans to DC Water, and also submitting phase 2 and 3 raised drawing packages to the Department of Buildings, which are for the purpose of demolition and construction phase 2 especially. Next slide, please. I also want to point you to our community engagement that we did this past quarter. We released a newsletter where we highlighted our topping off ceremony, a small business program, as well as Zero Waste Week. A topping off ceremony is really to celebrate the last steel beam that was placed in the building's structural frame. Also, Zero Waste Week, it's an environmental campaign that challenges people to reduce landfill waste, which the project is committed to. I also want to point you to 2 upcoming events by Metro, one of them being the Metro's Bus Maintenance Information Session, which is happening in November, and also Metro's Transit Police Prospect Day open house in December. You can visit the links to find out how to register and more details. So thank you.
Any questions in the room?
Is there any volunteers, volunteer action to do anything for the community and in those areas?
When you say volunteer action, are you speaking to opportunities for the community to volunteer, or?
The community volunteering to clean up or wash the inside of the buses.
Right, so during the construction, the buses wouldn't be on site. What we can do is we can check in. I don't know of any volunteer opportunities, but we can check in and try to, see what's available. I don't know if Dan or Sean wanted to speak to that.
Maybe we can say the general details and provide some information. I'm not aware of anything.
All right. So what they're saying is if you don't mind, they can get your information. They can have a conversation with you about it.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you.
I would love to be one of the volunteers.
Excellent. Thank you. Mr. Montague? Yeah, just for those who are online.
Hey. Okay.
Awesome.
To speak to your point, the transit authority doesn't allow volunteers on property to do work that's done by union workers. Okay, that's part of their negotiated agreement or whatever. So they may have volunteers to come up if they have a special event or something like that. But general for work that because of safety issues and liability, they don't allow that. It's been that way since when I worked back there, back in the 80s, okay? And that's never changed. So the first thing that will happen is that the union will be up in arms saying you're taking somebody's work away. So there may be opportunities where there's a special event or something like that in support of the project, but in terms of not speaking for the authority, in terms of how they do business, that would be a big no-no. It just for liability reasons. So especially because, cleaning buses and that's definitely union representative jobs. Okay, but they can go back and talk to, he's not here tonight, the vice president for bus maintenance, and then he might have some say about that.
Okay. Thank you, former Commissioner Montague.
The comment that I had a question. I know that, Jamila mentioned about the, topping off of the building. And I should have said this a long time ago. When you all have events like that, do you all invite anybody outside of the group? You know, does the public ever get to see, or elected officials ever get to see? I'm not one, so I can ask. Do they ever get to see that, or since it's a milestone, is it just a milestone for you all to say, hey, we put a top on the building? Or is it a milestone to acknowledge the progress of the project?
Yeah, it's a construction milestone. It is not a project milestone in that you would, have an event. So it's basically like, I think Dan and Will talked about, and we'll talk about the glazing, right? You may have a dry-in moment. You have a building capping moment. Those are, stages of construction that aren't necessarily celebrated or observed milestones. Probably to the same reason you talked about, as you're in a construction area, the liability of bringing in public into a work zone. As you articulated.
I know you get ready to try to put it back in my face, okay? So.
To answer your question, in that case, no, it was just an internal construction event. Well, that's not to say that in the future, there won't be a more public event for a milestone, but we don't have one in mind right now. But, I'm sure that in future, in the next year, there'll probably, will be some kind of event.
Well, as the building is closer to being closed in, right. The Wall Street building because it's not really, other than the pits, there's not really going to be any place that's really going to harm anybody. But if you want the public to embrace what you're doing, trying to invite them in at every opportunity that you can, where they're not in danger.
But that's noted. So you're saying is if there's a chance to allow people to see the building kind of forming, consider that.
Yes, please.
Will do. Thank you, sir. Any other questions at this time? All right, with that, I'll turn it over to Dan Gauss for construction update.
All right, it's great to be here. Next slide. So last quarterly meeting, we had a couple conversations about the compressed natural gas, the CNG yard, and kind of wanted to highlight why we put it where we put it. So those that were kind of around about a year and a half ago now, Jim Ash actually gave a quick recap of why the site's kind of laid out the way it is. And you can kind of see the 4 arrows. The goal of the site for the bus drivers is to kind of have a counterclockwise movement so that it eliminates the blind spots. So again, if you're looking at kind of all the way around the site, the buses want to go in a counterclockwise, and then up in the upper left-hand corner, I guess on the screen, it's left as well in that red box. That's where the CNG yard is. So before I move on, just kind of take a quick snapshot of this in your mind, and as we progress through the next slide, you'll kind of understand why. It's hard to see down in that lower left arrow right there. There's that entrance. So that's where they get in, and then they kind of make their way around. Next slide. So another consideration for where we located it was, again, to kind of reduce the length of underground piping. So you can see there on the right, there's the fuel building. So that's the fuel canopy. That's where the buses fuel with the CNG. And right over to the left there is actually where the CNG yard is. So again, we wanted to reduce the length of the pipe underground. And if you imagine putting this kind of in the center of the site, you're just increasing the pipe length. Next slide. Then there's a concern about protection. So I'm kind of going to run through some of the protection measures that are in place for the equipment. Right now, this is the kind of the landscaping. So you can see along 25th Place, we do have trees. Obviously, once the trees are planted and they mature, they'll provide a little bit more protection as the years go on. Next slide. And then here are the standoff distance. So we have those 2 buildings that are in gray in that yard. Off of Bladensburg, the property line, there's 16 feet. And then the property line itself is actually set back from the road an additional 10 feet. And then on 25th Place, to the corner of that building is 23 feet. Again, that's off of the property line. So there's there's another offset to the actual road itself. Next slide. So here's the actual yard. So again, those two orange, those are the two buildings. So you have a control room, and then you also have the electrical room, and then all of the blue boxes, rectangles, those are the actual CNG equipment. And then that yellow rectangle is where the actual supply comes from Washington Gas. So again, and then you have that retaining wall, that's the black line all the way around. So you got to imagine now that you have the fence, the permanent fence around the building, you have this retaining wall, then you have those buildings before anything could ever get to the actual CNG equipment. And that picture on the left, that's actually the retaining wall. So it's a little bit hard to see, but you can see that manhole kind of way back in the picture there. That's actually finished grade. So the top of that is what the finished grade will be. So from that up to the top of the retaining wall in that corner there is about 3.5 feet. Next slide. So moving on, just some site updates and progress updates. Here's a lot of the exterior. So roof, we actually finished the roof at this point. So you can kind of see that white, that's the finished roof layer. We installed a lot of the glazing. Most of the glazing at this point is installed and has been tested. And then we also started the site utilities. Next slide. This is a pretty cool shot. So there is a pedestrian bridge that goes from the maintenance building over top of the roadway for the buses that ties into the parking garage. So this is the first half of that bridge. The second half will be set in phase 2. You can kind of see it from both sides. Again, our building is really long, so some of these pictures, it's hard to actually show the perspective of actually how long it is. But next slide. Here's just another picture, kind of again trying to show work progressing, and again how just long the building is and where we're at in construction. All the precast is done, the windows are up, and we've actually started overhead doors. Next slide. How accurate and safe is it? So it's, I believe that the overhead doors are 14 foot wide, which is the same as the stalls, and it's the same as the doors that they have there now. So it should be fairly safe. Yeah, and I can't speak for WMATA's operations, but I'm sure that they have, I'm assuming they might have some protocol, but again, I can't speak for WMATA.
Yeah. So we'll make sure, because I want to make sure we have the questions for both online and in person. So we have about 10 more slides, and then we'll do the open Q&A for everyone. No problem. But I just want to, that's why I want to give you an answer first. But I just want to, just so we get through it. Thank you so much, though, for your question.
So again, one other thing that I wanted to highlight is the rainwater harvesting tank from last quarterly meeting. We had talked about that. That was kind of one of the design highlights. So you remember there's one on the other side of the building. There's another large tank on this side. So you can see the progress. So we finished driving all the piles, and we've started making our first initial cut and into our our second cut. So you kind of see the progression from left to right there. Next slide. We also started the CXX wall. So we have a small retaining wall on the north side of the site. Right on the other side of that fence is the CXX lines. These piles here you see were actually drilled just due for safety for the tracks and everything. We had a lot of coordination with CXX, and we kind of came to the resolution that drilling these piles and setting them in concrete was the best for us and them. So you can kind of see the progress. This wall is actually done. We just have to clean up the bench that you see those pieces of equipment on. Next slide. Again, here's the interior. You can see the roof is on. We really wanted to highlight how much slab on grade work has been completed. As of last week, we have finished all of the interior slab on grade. That's basically the concrete down on the floor there. And you can kind of see a couple different angles and viewpoints. Next slide. Continuing on with the interior. So the mason has finished up most of their really tall wall. I shouldn't say really tall, but they're tall walls. We've started painting the first coat of paint on the interior. And a lot of our overhead mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and fire protection has started to go in as well. Next slide. And then some last shots here. We did set all of the rooftop equipment. Our overhead doors have started, and we've actually started all of the interior permanent stairs. I think with that, I'll turn it over to Donzel for questions.
Thank you. So are there any other questions? Mr. Montague.
First question has to do with, I know at the Northern Bus Garage, there's an issue with soil contaminants and haven't been removed and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Are we monitoring? I know that we did soil remediation on this site, but are we doing any monitoring similar to what we would do at Northern for things that may have been left or that we didn't know about?
So we had DOE actually opened up a lost case that we closed for phase 1, which required us to monitor for a time period. At the conclusion of that time period, we took samples and samples were under the limits, and they allowed us to close the permit or close the lost case. Good to go in phase 1, yeah.
So we go through the same process in phase 2?
Yeah, we might have to, yes.
Mr. Montague, if I can ask you to, thank you, sir.
Sorry. It had something to do with the building itself.
Retaining wall.
Yeah, this somebody asked one, it'll come back.
You have another question?
I was gonna ask about the safety limit, not limit, but the safety requirements on the bus.
For the bus itself?
Yeah, the bus itself.
So I think the buses will comply with the current WMATA safety requirements for buses. And it's right now, just to kind of bring up where we are in the process is like they are just starting to build the garage itself. So there are no buses there. So, but any buses that will come are buses that are part of the fleet that comply with whatever DDOT, Federal Department of Transportation regulations. Beyond that, this team was a construction team. They wouldn't be able to really speak to
I understand.
the bus part.
I understand.
Thank you. But you did just enough time for Mr. Montague to remember his question.
It came back. CNG source. Okay. So at the back of the property, midway, I'm assuming inside the CSX retaining wall, right? Okay. It was my understanding that when the original CNG plant was installed, the fuel source is actually on the opposite side of the railroad tracks and goes under the railroad tracks. So you all mitigated all of that when you put in the piles for the retaining wall and this, that, and the other, right?
Yeah, we actually basically Washington Gas was out there. We had them out there when we put piles on either side. Piles are about 6 foot on center. So it's on either side. They gave us a thumbs up on that design, and they were actually out here last week. We did a field walk with them to finalize their design to come to connect that existing line all around the site.
Okay, so that confirms that the source is still on the opposite side of the tracks and
Yeah.
and then onto property. Hence, that's why the CNG receiving plant is where it's located. See, Mr. Washington, Mr. Robinson, wasn't that painful?
Thank you so much. So I just wanted to confirm, I thought there was a question from Ms. DiPietro. Did we get a question? No? Who's online?
Oh, this went directly to Emma. Apologies if this is outside the scope of this meeting, but if not, could you please comment on what light pollution considerations are incorporated into the design? The lights in the lot now aren't particularly well shielded and shine into the houses on the south side of Everett Street, the north side of the site.
So I guess did you understand the question?
Yeah, so I think we have additional shielding, but we're also trying to adhere to the requirements for the safety and security of the depot itself. But we have looked at that. I could probably provide some additional information, but I don't have it right now. But that's a topic we can address in the next quarterly meeting.
Okay, or we can just, connect with the constituent when we can. All right. Any other questions at this time? With that, I'll turn it over to Jamila.
Thank you, Don. Yeah, okay, it's on. Thank you, Donzel. So looking ahead to the next quarter, next slide, please. In December, we'll be working on items including the equipment and connections for the East Rainwater Harvesting Vault, also mechanical, electrical, and plumbing items for the CNG yard and building, diesel and fuel vault testing, as well as north ramp work. In the new year, we will work on including installing terracotta on the building's facade, the East Rainwater Harvesting Vault, as well as continuing north ramp work. And in the month of February, we will work on items including power feeds for the electrical building in the CNG yard, plus continued work on the terracotta panels and the north ramp. Next slide, please. This is our schedule from November through anticipated project completion. It is a goal that the project strives to meet as it progresses, and I'll highlight a few of the major milestones, including completing the new maintenance facility in the third quarter of 2024, starting phase 2 demolition in the fourth quarter of 2024, completing the new parking garage in the second quarter of 2026, and completing the entire project by the fourth quarter of 2026. And as VEB design progresses, we will update the schedule for any impacts that it may have. And at this point, I will pass it to Maya.
Thank you, Jamila. Okay, and I'll just go over a quick recap of how to contact us after this meeting periodically. Please go to our website, wamata.com/Bladensburg Bus Garage, and sign up for our updates, so you can get newsletters and any additional information. You can also email us at bladensburgbusgarage@wamata.com, and we'll be responding to those emails. And we'll give you more information about the next winter meeting, which will be virtual. You can also follow us on the various media sites in the bottom for additional information regarding this project and any other projects for WMATA. Next slide, please.
All right, any final questions for this project update? Mr. Montague.
This is okay, you turned the building over in third quarter 2024, right? You're finished basically until they come back with a little checklist and say, no, not quite, da, 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 da. So at some point, bus maintenance is going to take over ownership of the building. In the project plan, because it's actually interferes with the construction schedule, could you put a blurb in there when they convert from the existing maintenance building to the new? So because there's going to be a period of time in there where you're going to have employees moving from A to B. It's not going to happen overnight, Because if it does, when they move into the new building with all the new fancy whatever, half of the people in the old building not gonna know where anything is. So I know, well, we would like to say it's flip a switch and it happens. It won't. In addition, bus operators will have a new route and a new building to go into. So that whole thing, but is beyond the scope of your work, but it impacts your work.
So you're saying a communication to the community around that, when that transition begins
So,
to happen?
yeah, so that we know that that's an activity that will occur, and when if there's a hiccup or how we're gonna move from A to B.
So we've started planning for that now. There is actually, in the construction schedule, there is a 6-week window
Okay.
where activity, where we get substantial completion or the occupancy permit and bus operations moves over. Now but we're talking to them and already coordinate, so it is kind of within the scope of the project. So we're doing that planning now. Now they bus operations is wanting to do a pretty quick transfer. But we actually need more time on the old building for asset management to come in and recover old equipment and that. So we have got that window captured in the schedule.
So let me ask you this. Are you moving any equipment from the old building to the new? Or is everything in the new building going to be new?
Mechanic tools and that's getting moved, but most of the major equipment is new.
Okay, so all the lifts, the washers and
All
all
the
that
lifts,
stuff is all
tire
that.
system, all that is new.
Okay, then let me ask this one last question. So, I heard some pile driving. First thing came to mind was you all, but you all weren't pile driving. So I don't know where it was occurring, but when the second stormwater retention tank is done, how close are you all to finishing that?
We are probably, I think, a month and a half to 2 months.
Okay, so by the end of the year, that'll be done and not a headache.
Should be, yeah. Like I said, we're done driving piles. We don't have any more piles to drive.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. So thank you all for joining us for this community engagement meeting. We will reconvene next quarter. And we appreciate you continue to stay engaged. Look forward to seeing you next time. Be safe. Thank you.